sickness. So I did watch it, and it was awesome.
We were all thinking about you. So real quick, I want to run through the agenda. I think we've got a great meeting today. We open up with a constant favorite of everyone. Maxine will be presenting about the PU disposition strategy. In that, we're going to go into the AMCAP fuel inspections, which seems to be something that only Dave Isley knows about. So we expect the best questions from you. You got it? The burden's all on you. Oh, no, it'll be fine. After that, we'll break for lunch, and then we're going to come into the high-level waste interpretation presentation. So that's going to be the big one today. That's the one that we're going to make sure to make lots of time for. As Gil was talking about yesterday, we're going to go around the table with CAB questions first. We'll make sure that we answer whatever you guys need to know to understand the issue. And then we're going to open it up to the public. We're going to do a one-time thing, something very different from what we normally do. We're going to take questions. I don't have a separate sign-up sheet for that. When it comes time, I'm just going to ask folks to line up behind the microphone. And I will probably have to make this announcement again, considering how light the audience is at the moment. I do expect it to change, but I could be wrong. Afterwards, if we need to, depending on how long it goes, we may take another break. If not, if we're still raring to go, we'll dive into the contracting process. Now, this one actually comes out of a presentation from about a year ago. There were a lot of contract questions that came up, and a board member expressed, I don't know a whole lot about federal contracting. So we're going to fix that today, hopefully. And somebody's going to come in, Craig Armstrong, he's going to talk about just some general basics of federal contracting and help you understand the ins and outs of what they do. Zach Todd is going to come in afterwards with the military training update, and then we'll get a peek into SCD HEC's oversight role. Last May, we heard from EPA. Now we're going to get the state perspective on that. Then we're going to go into voting for some recommendation closures after some public comments, and then we'll adjourn the meeting. Any questions about our agenda today? Seeing none. Just want to go over a few of the base rules for this morning. Same things that we always do. I'm going to ask you to please use the microphones when you make questions or comments. Please make sure that you're speaking directly into it. If your head swivels, your microphone needs to travel with you, please. I want to make sure that we capture everything you say. We don't like having gaps in the minutes. It makes things awkward and we make stuff up. Just kidding, we don't do that. But please state your name and affiliation when you do make your comments. We'd like to make sure that we attribute things to the proper person. Hold all questions until the end of the presentation, please. We're all pretty good about that one. Do not dominate, have side conversations. Again, as we're asking questions, please try to limit yourself to one or two, and then we'll go around the table. If there's still questions, we'll come back. We'll try to make sure that everybody who has a question gets heard today. Please put your phones and pagers on silent. And then the last thing I want to ask everybody is to participate and make sure that you ask questions that seek clarification, because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn. We're here to participate in the discussion. Let's make sure that our questions are really focused on trying to understand the subject and getting all the good that we can get out of the subject matter experts that we hear from today. Any questions about the ground rules? Anything leaving out that we need to add? No? AK, think of anything? AK is good. The rest of us good? All right. Maxine, are you ready? And we're going to start off with a video, right?
We have a video today. You can't get into K area because of the security, so we wanted to give you some pictures of what it actually looks like in a video is better than my pictures on my slides. So we thought we would start this off. It's similar to what we did for L area, an overview of the facility and the people. So you're going to see a lot of things. A lot of things won't be explained, so I'll try to step in where I can to explain what's going on in the picture behind you. But you're going to see a lot of our workers and folks out there. Okay? And you're the first ones to see this. CCO
operations at the K Area Complex provide for the inventory, security, and storage of much of DOE's excess plutonium and other special nuclear materials. Its unique mission is at the heart of national security and the United States Nuclear Non-Proliferation Mission.
Those are
The K Area
99.25.
Complex is the Department of Energy's only Category 1 special nuclear materials storage facility, designated for interim safe storage of plutonium and highly enriched uranium at the Savannah River site. The K Area Complex has a rich history. The main storage facility building in the complex, 105K, is a former production reactor used to produce nuclear materials for the U.S. during the Cold War era.
K Area is a neat place because there's a lot of history there.
K Area was an operating reactor. It went critical 1955.
Interestingly
old
enough,
pictures.
a lot of the operators we have here today running the plant or
That's
were
the
here back in
control
the
room.
reactor days. A lot of them
That's
had
the
an
controls.
awful lot of pride of what they did then. They were making a big difference what happened in our world, and they've got that same pride today as they look at what's going on around that.
So that reactor was operating, we're making steam, we're making product, and we had maybe a couple hundred people in the area.
The reactor was shut down near the end of the Cold War. Because of its robust construction, security infrastructure, and rigorous seismic and structural upgrades, 105K was chosen by DOE in early 2000 to serve as their premier plutonium storage facility.
We got our first shipment of that material in July of 2002. And since that time, we've received lots of drums, lots of containers of material.
Since 2002, K Area has received and stored excess plutonium from across the DOE complex, including Rocky Flats, Hanford, SRS's FB line, Los Alamos National Laboratory, and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Plutonium
That's at
materials
3013.
shipped to K Area are sealed inside DOE standard 3013 containers that are placed inside robust, state-of-the-art certified shipping packages called 9975s. Both 9975s and the 3013 containers inside them are routinely surveyed to ensure continued safe storage in the K Area material storage area. But K Area isn't just a storage facility.
In the last year and a half, we really started making a transition to a full-scale 24/7 production facility.
When you think about plutonium disposition and you think about the different missions that have been outlined for plutonium disposition, the only one that still is on the table today is to go do downblend or dilute and dispose. And K Area is the place where that happens. And that's a very critical non-proliferation mission.
Downblend involves blending plutonium oxide with an inert material, resulting in a final waste form. This produces a mixture that is more secure and not usable for weapons that can be safely disposed at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico and helps get nuclear materials out of South Carolina.
Those
That's
are true
probably
pack
our
two.
biggest emphasis out in K Area right now, is figuring out how to safely take the material that we've got in storage, get it processed so that it can't be used for anything bad out there in the world, and get it ready to put into a permanent repository.
K Area is also currently expanding missions and optimizing processes to expedite the plutonium disposition process.
Yeah, so K Area is really right in the middle of a huge transformation. We have a lot of projects moving. One that we're working on a project that optimizes one of our processing plants. That project has a lot of energy behind it, should have a lot of benefits from production efficiency, and make it a little easier on the operators to be able to increase the throughput as we go through the plant.
We're also putting in our CCO storage and characterization pad, which is going to give us the capability out in K Area to take those downblended drums, assay them, and get them ready to package to ship to a permanent repository.
Surplus Plutonium Disposition Mission, or SPD, a big effort. We're bringing in additional processing capacity into the facility. Large project.
Which is very exciting for K Area. K Area has been the location where things come in, but not a lot of things leave. So seeing them
This is them cutting open the
being
3013.
prepared to leave the state is a very, very big deal.
This one's sort of like bolting a highway onto a superhighway, because we still got to keep running everything else as we bring that one on. That project's going to bring a lot of different challenges to us.
We're bringing in a lot of new people. We're rolling in 70, 80 people over the next year or two And that is a challenge for us to make sure that the culture that's existed in Carrier for a long period of time, that gets transferred over.
After we get these projects, get all the design work done, get things installed in the facilities, getting the new staff trained to execute those missions.
That's
is
our
something that's gonna go on
omnidirectional
for a long
mixer.
time. But it's making progress to get the material in the right place.
With all of the changes coming to K Area, the employees will remain focused on safety, teamwork, and their mission to help protect the nation and the world.
K area is definitely important to the future of the country and to the safe management of plutonium.
The K Area missions is what's going to help us make this world safer for us now and for our families and friends in the future.
Safeguarding the nuclear materials to keep them out of the wrong people's hands is obviously a very important mission.
We approach everything as a team. It's not, I have to do this, you have to do this. To say we have to do this. This is our mission. This is our goal.
I know a lot of times we get lost in the details of shuffling paper, or attending meetings, or doing the MFOs or the other things that we've got to do day in and day out. But when you really step back and look at it, what we do out here matters.
Because we are safeguarding nuclear material from the bad guys.
K-Area's always been thought of as an interim storage facility for plutonium, and that mission is really starting to change with these projects and increasing the downblend scope to get that plutonium out of the state. So it's been an exciting time.
It matters not only for us and not only for our kids, but for decades down the road.
So that's our video. Do you want to do questions now or just wait till the end?
Do you think that they would, whatever you want to do?
Okay. If we had questions on the video, we'll take them now so you don't have to remember them through my presentation. Okay?
Joyce has one.
Joyce Underwood Cab. In the very beginning, it said in the voiceover that it was only Category 1. I don't remember what it was.
So it's the main plutonium storage facility for the department is what it was trying to relay. It's the only one of its kind in the department.
Okay, so it just the text and the voiceover did not jive. It
Okay.
said two different things, so I was wanting to know which one it was. So it's the only one.
Right.
Okay.
So it is a Category 1 in security space. It's a Category 1 facility. So sometimes they'll use the Cat 1 categorization name for the facility as well.
Okay, that's all I have, but I'll say this, that atomic palmetto, whoever came up with that, awesome.
So, all right, so I'm going to go into just the EM side. What you saw in the video, it covers both some of the NNSA work that K-Area does and the EM work. So when they talk about hiring employees in that special project, that's all NNSA activities that they're doing. And we work hand in hand with NNSA in K-Area to get the mission completed because we're using the same equipment, same facility, and same operators. So it's a hand-in-hand collaboration that we do. Oh, I don't have the clicker. Okay. So you saw that in the video. It's an old reactor. You can see that we have changed our sign here. They are now have basically the palmetto tree, and in the middle is a little 3013. They're very proud of their rebranding because they're not just a storage facility anymore. You saw the pride come out in the people in the video. Those are actual people, actual workers. I see them on a daily basis. Acronyms, I'm going to try not to use them, but you'll have them for reference. So in 1994, the department decided that they needed to stabilize and package plutonium into a final form. Plutonium is, and there's stories back in the history before my time where people were storing it. They didn't know that it was so corrosive and you could have it in plastic and it would degrade the plastic. So it was a real problem of how do you package this safely and keep it that way so that it doesn't degrade over time. So that's when they came up with this DOE standard 3013, and that's why all of the containers are called 3013s because they've been done in compliance with that standard. It's a robust oxide stabilization process. So that material has been stabilized at 950 degrees C for at least 2 hours. The packaging was designed to withstand like 966 PSIG. It's inside, did I get that right? Yeah. It's inside 2 welded containers because the concern at the time was that this stuff could pressurize. It could release hydrogen and pressurize, so you had to have a container that would handle any pressurization buildup inside of it. And then it required a surveillance program. So we had all the smart people at the time put down what they thought needed to be done, but they knew, because they were smart, that we have to look at it to make sure our assumptions are right and that we're not just going in blindly with, we know it all, let's go back and check it. So we do that through our destructive examination program, and I'll get into that and more. So you saw in the video, it came from 5 different sites: Rocky Flats, Hanford, Los Alamos, Livermore, and the Savannah River site. Some more pictures just so you get an idea, because it was pretty fast in the video, but this is how we store inside CAMs, and CAMs is the K area material access, I believe. I can't remember why I can't say that now. So this is a 3013 container, weighs about 30 pounds, it's pretty heavy, doesn't look heavy, but it's pretty heavy. Inside of it, you can see there's another inner 3013, and then there's a convenience can that the oxide is actually in. So all 3 of those are inside, those 2 are inside that. It's stored in a 9975. This is a DOT container. It's been certified under the NRC requirements. And then this is what it looks like inside. And we only store one 3013 inside one of these containers. And all of this is to make sure that if there were to be an accident, a fire, or something like that, that material is going to stay inside that can inside there. Okay? And then this shows you what the oxide looks like inside of an open 3013. Okay, so we talked about the surveillance and monitoring program. So we are required under a DOE order to actually do a program where we evaluate the 3013 to make sure it's safe for storage for over 50 years. And that's done by the Material Identification and Surveillance Working Group. These are all the experts on plutonium from around the complex that know what's going on with that material, and they oversee this project. We actually manage that project from our office, but it's a complex-wide, so they have conference calls every week around the complex talking about the material. So they know all of the cans that we have, all the material inside those cans, and which ones are the most susceptible to corrosion or potentially being a problem. So they go through using a statistician that we have on board to identify which ones need to be looked at to see if we're getting to the worst possible containers that are there. So we do that. They basically look at it. There's also a random selection that they do, as well as the ones they call it engineering judgment, the ones that they feel could be the worst containers. So just in case they're missing something, we also have random ones that they look at. Let's see. And then for us, the 6 metric tons, which is a little different than the NSA material, ours is I'm going to say trash. It's the worst of the worst out there. We have chlorides, we have salts, we have all kinds of things, the scrapings when they were cleaning out their glove boxes and stuff. That's what the 6 metric tons is made of. And NSA has purer, cleaner stuff, easier to deal with, but our 6 metric tons is the gamut. So that's what they're looking at. It's both weapons grade and fuels grade. That's just the amount of plutonium and the way the isotopics work in the plutonium. And so we also have a shelf life program. So instead of just using what we have in storage, we actually set up a program at Los Alamos of both real size and miniature sized plutonium storage containers, making them up of the worst that we thought, and studying how that happens in a controlled environment so that we can go and pull these off the shelf at any time to see how those are doing as well. We keep that program going. The problem that they thought they were going to have was pressure. Not seen any pressure build up. The problem that we have is the chlorides. The chlorides will actually corrode the inner container. We've only seen it on the inner container, the convenience can container. So that's what they're looking at now is the salts, the impurities that can cause that pitting to happen. That's where our main issue is. That's where all of the focus on our destructive examinations are currently. Okay. We started with a non-destructive evaluation where you would basically x-ray the containers and things like that. They completed that program. They didn't find anything in that program. So that was finished. Now we're actually doing just the DEs going forward. We have to do 7 DEs a year. And basically we do analyze for gas. We used to do that inside the KISS glove box, which is the K area interim storage glove box. The only one we have operational in K area right now. But because we aren't seeing any of that pressure buildup, we're actually going to be able to eliminate that from the glove box, give us more room for the operators to work more efficiently, and we're going to do that up at SRNL. And they're actually going to be able to take the lid and sample the lid to see if there's any leaks coming out of the lid, so we don't have to do those gas sample analysis anymore, but they will be doing them at SRNL. They go through and they do metallurgy of the containers. They do cross-section pictures of, 10,000 pictures for one container to go through and evaluate if there's any cracks or pits or corrosion. And we're supposed to complete the random DEs in 2025, and we will continue the DE program as long as we have problematic or those suspect materials stored at SRS. We haven't identified any condition yet that would challenge the 50-year storage life. So we found a few little pits. So they're evaluating those, they're evaluating the material in that, and if they need to change the selection criteria for the others that we look at. And then we're just going to continue that program until we've either eliminated them with plutonium or we have found that there's nothing that could happen to those. So this is what goes on in K area. We talk about downblend. Excuse me a second. This is just a little flow sheet. So this is plutonium oxide. This is the 3013. This yellow box represents the KISS glove box. This is what happens inside of it. So you bring in your 3013. You're also going to bring in your adulterant cans that have already been loaded with their adulterant. So they come in. So we have to puncture and cut and open the 3013 container. You saw that with the pipe cutter drawing in the video. Then they have to sieve and size this. So basically it's a powder, but that powder can have lumps in it, kind of like when a cat uses a litter box, it can have those kind of clumps. So you have to beat those down to get a consistent size. So they have tools that do that, basically a mortar and pestle. We have a little sieve in there. We also have a coffee grinder if they need it. And it's really a coffee grinder. It's just, it's a pharmaceutical grade one. This is not big stuff. We like to keep it as simple as we can. Then you add, whoops, I went the wrong way, sorry. You add in the determined amount of plutonium oxide. So we can add 150 grams of PU oxide into a blend can. And that's to meet the WIPWAC criteria, which is the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. So we do that, then we have to load, you put that into the blend can that already has the adulterant in it, you mix it together with that omnidirectional mixer you saw in the video, and then you bag it out. And you did see them bagging out in the video as well. So that comes out, then it gets loaded into just it's like a food pack can, basically. It's just a can with a lid on it. We'll put a piece of tape over it because we want it to be vented for WIP. And then that will be they'll do an analysis. You saw that big yellow or big white round thing when they were holding it up to a bag in there? They were actually doing analysis on that. They were making sure what they said they put in it was actually what they put in it. And then they load that into a criticality control overpack, which was that drum that had a pipe in the middle. And these blend cans, you put 2 of those in that pipe in the middle that you saw in the video. And then those get staged in K area. one of the things that NSA is working on is putting an actual storage facility in K area that's outside of our facility so that we can store all these CCOs, have WIP come in and do their characterization there, and actually ship in the True Pack 2s from there. So that's something that they're working on. We should see that in the next couple of years. And we'll be able to benefit from that use as well. So they'll do that characterization on that pad, load it into the True Pack, and ship it to WIP. So, and you're going to hear NNSA calls theirs dilute and dispose. They do that because in international, when you translate downblend, it doesn't translate to what we think, what we're saying. So that's why they use the dilute word. And we like downblend because we don't dilute in the United States. And there's some more pictures of the process. This is actually the glove box. Glove box here, you can see with two of the operators. It is a very tight room, so anything we can do inside the glove box to make it more efficient for the operators, we're going to try and do. So we will be taking an outage this fall to try to get rid of some of the equipment we no longer need in there and make it a more streamlined process. This is just a pan they will actually take the 3013, dump it into this pan, and that's how they'll get the measurements to weigh. That's a blend can. You see it has a vent on the top. It gets packaged into a vented bag. That's a vent on the bag. And then it goes into this outer can here. This is the criticality control overpack. This is the pipe inside. And inside here we can put 2 CCOs, and each one can hold up to 150 grams. So we can put 300 grams in 1 CCO in order to ship that to WIP. And that's accountability measurements requirements. WIP, you can actually get to 380, but because we don't want to have an error in, so when you're measuring for accountability, you have to put so many standard deviations on your analysis to say if you're in the ballpark. We have basically done that math so that we will never exceed that by being at 300 versus the 380 that's allowed. So in summary, our life cycle is the 6 metric tons. It's going to take us a while to do that, 2046, because EM is paying for 1 shift of operations. Any other operations, any other shifts, NNSA is paying for. So our life cycle baseline shows 2046 for us to complete this project with all the materials being shipped to WIP. We require additional funding for additional shifts. If we want, the baseline assumes 2 shifts starting in, I think, 21 or 22. So we will be requesting that. Now, whether we get it or not will depend on what we need and what NNSA is doing. So all of our work now, we collaborate with NNSA, and it'll help us expedite downblending and removal of the plutonium from the state of South Carolina. They're actually establishing that WIP characterization pad in K area. So that's going to help us a lot because we didn't have the funding to do that. So I think we're going to have to just work hand in hand through this, and everybody realizing we have 6 metric tons, they have a 34 more that we're just going to work through, and we're going to try and figure out the best way to do that for the taxpayers' benefit. And I think that's all I had. Yep. Any questions?
What a wild job. I mean, think about it. Somebody went to work one day, they poured plutonium into a pan, mixed it with material, put it in a paint mixer, and then went home and had dinner like their life is normal. Wild. But then you hear them talk about it on the video, and they're so certain of what their mission is, and they know the greater picture and how things fit in. What a great story. You know what? I'm not going to start with Dave. I'm going to start with Greg.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Greg Murray, CAB. It's kind of related to James's comment there. So I saw with the picture of the operators. Who are these operators? Are they
They're your
technicians of some sort? Are they scientists? Are they?
Some of them are scientists. Some of them are engineers. Some of them are just in the neighborhood. Their grandparents worked out here. Their parents worked out here. There's a lot of pride, a lot of ownership in what they do. But they're just normal people. I mean,
How much training do they get
they get a lot of training.
to do that particular job of?
Yes, so they have to go through certain qualifications, and like a building operator qualification, then the glove box operator qualification. So they go through all kinds of qualifications, and it's probably at least an 18-month process once they get on site to go through the training and be qualified.
And is that all they do all day for 8 hours, is work in the glove box and smash powder up?
So we try to break it up for them because they're also the ones that are going and mining the 9975s that we need. So they're having to pull those in, they're having to open those up. So it is tedious work, but we try to break it up so that they're not doing the exact repetitive thing every single second.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's just go around the table. Tom?
Tom French, DeKalb. Maxine, some years ago they talked about putting multiple box lines. Is that still
That's
being
the
considered?
NNSA project.
Okay, so they're going to add more boxes. Okay.
Yeah, it's a surplus plutonium disposition, you'll hear it called, and they're looking at adding 3 glove box lines into K area, not where the KISS glove box is because they won't fit, but another area inside K where they can put in up to 3 glove box lines, and that's what they're working on now, is evaluating.
Okay. Thanks.
Carl?
Yes, thank you, Maxine. Carl Steen, CAB. When you get shipments in of materials from other countries or other labs, do you go through all the same protocols in terms of assay or measurement or verification? Do you have what they say you have?
Yes, sir, we're required under our material control and accountability rules. Whenever we get a shipment in, we have to verify whatever the shipper has told us, and then our, we call it MCNA, Material Control and Accountability folks, who actually go in and they do analysis to say, is that exactly what they said they were shipping to us? So that's all done upon receipt.
Yeah, thank you.
Doug Howard, CAB. Excuse me. Actually, another great presentation.
Thank you.
I do have a few questions. Was it 1994 when they decided to bring all the plutonium and store it in one place?
That's when they made the decision to start the consolidation process, but we had to get K area modified to accept it. So we actually didn't receive anything till I think it was 2002, I think is what Mark said in the video. It's 2002 is when the first shipments started coming in.
Now, out of the other locations that at that time had the plutonium, why did they choose SRS? I mean, why did they choose this area?
I think it's because of our reactor building and the ability to get the security force there and the dedicated work staff. I mean, we are extremely fortunate at Savannah River Site. We have, in my opinion, the best workforce and the most committed to workforce in the DOE complex. I'm probably going to get a bad email from my other colleagues, but I think our folks are so dedicated because it's generations that have worked out here, that went into the factor as well.
If for some reason we have to continue to store the material beyond the 50 years, what would they do? Would they have to repackage?
So currently we would have to probably repackage, which we don't have the capability to do that stabilization right now. So part of what the material identification and surveillance program is doing is they're collecting data when we do these DEs on all that material to see if there's a way to show that they're safe longer than the 50 years as well. So not only are we trying to ensure that they're safe now, but they're going to try to look at that if they have to. We're hoping not, but if they have to, look at the data that's been collected and see if they can make a case to say that it's safer for more than 50 years.
And the final question I have, hopefully I can ask it, the pit production, that will be done at the K area?
No, sir. That's an NNSA program, and I'm not exactly sure where they're going to be looking at that, but K area is not on the books for that.
Now, that's going to also create waste. Will that be taken care of there in K area?
So that's an NNSA program, and we do not know what their thoughts are at this time for that material.
Thank you.
Jim?
Jim
Cab. Thank you for a good presentation again, as always. Question, is all of the plutonium now in K area, or is it still some at other sites?
There's some at other sites.
And it's in an oxide form?
It could be oxide or metal at the other sites. It could be in any form. Some of the material, at least the surplus plutonium that's not the 6 metric tons, is awaiting stabilization to be put into 3013s.
Okay. And is there any plutonium for K area being generated out of the liquid waste program here?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank
No,
you.
Jim's not one of our problems.
Good news, right, Jim? Dan?
Dan Kaminsky, Cab. Thank you, Maxine, for a great presentation. I'm just curious on a couple of the ins and outs, as Jim would call it, or actually Michael was. So the ins, would it be possible for maybe the committee meeting to have a graph showing the inventory, the history buildup, and then the forecasted depletion through the downblending process of the 6 metric tons?
We will take a look at what we can do. Some of that information is not releasable, but we will see what we can do for the committee meeting. If there's a way to range it or something, I'll look at what we can do, but you're not going to get the inventory numbers. That's not something we can release.
Okay. The size of the downblending has been kind of a concern because obviously WIP is as big as it is right now, and it would take a huge undertaking to expand that facility. And I don't know the specific plans for them to do so. So do we know how much space would be required for the downblended material and what space is actually available at WIP?
So they have plenty of space for the 6 metric tons. NNSA has worked with them on their material as well, and from my understanding, there is no issue with space on their material as well.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
Dave Isley, Cab. Thank you, Maxine. I'm amazed that you could go through that complicated thing in 20 minutes. Bravo. This 2046 date, that's the first time I've seen that. Has that been negotiated with the state? Are they okay with that?
So this is just an EM life cycle baseline. This is what we put. We have to project out when our program will end in EM. And so we've done this analysis to figure out how long it's going to take us just to do the 6 metric tons. And we have to do that every year to update it with any assumptions. And it has funding in it. It's basically for the liability to determine what is the total liability of this program. So we've done that for the past 5 years, I'd say, where we've had to put that together. And the 2046 comes out of that date. It's not been negotiated. It's just what we think we can do to get rid of the 6 metric tons.
Okay, so, but the state knows that that's the baseline, and that you haven't talked to them about it, other than it's a baseline number. It's
right
to some extent not phony, but with 300 grams per
yeah. So the state
container, 6 metric tons. Do the math. That's a bunch of true packs going with.
So the state in the lawsuit is tied to the MOX. So because of that tie to the MOX, NNSA is handling all those negotiations right now.
Now, Wilkerson was talking about the project. If they go forward with that, and I've seen 3 or 4 different versions of, Lord knows what it looks like now, but would you have access to those glove boxes and potentially speed this up demonstrably?
So we are working with NNSA on that. We would have access to be able to use the glove boxes, but especially if they're shielded glove boxes, whereas the K area one is not right now. So that would help us a lot in some of our material, because we do have some high dose material. So we are working with them to negotiate what material goes through and when, and a lot of that will be determined based on the negotiations with the state.
Do they have a ballpark number of what it would cost? The last number I saw was astronomical to do that project.
I have not seen a cost estimate for the 3 glove boxes, so I couldn't tell you what it is right now.
Okay, thank you.
Narendra.
Good morning, Narendra Malik, Cab. I think you mentioned after storage some of the containers get started corroded. How often it happens?
That they get, I'm sorry, what?
Corroded.
Corroded. So this is when we do our destructive examination. If we've found And I think we've only found probably less than a handful that actually have some form of corrosion or pitting. And when I say corrosion or pitting, I'm talking microscopic level. This isn't, you go out there and you see a crack in the inner container. It's microscopic look that they've looked at to see that you've got a little pit here that's formed or potentially a little crack here. That's what they're looking at. They're using, and I don't even know the names of the pieces of equipment, but very high-tech microscopes to do the analysis of that metal to see if there's any kind of corrosion. That's what they're looking at. You can't see it with your naked eye.
Do they get repacked?
Do they get repacked? They're already, when we do the DEs, the material's already taken out, so yes, sir, it's being repacked. And those containers are then being basically destroyed in our evaluation of them.
Final question. Does this material has any fissile material in that?
It's plutonium, so yes, sir, but it's been stabilized.
Well, if that is the case, then it's a high-level waste, then how can we send it?
It's not high-level waste. It does not come from a reactor in terms of, it doesn't meet the definition of high-level waste.
Okay.
So,
We'll
the
see.
current definition of high-level waste, it does not meet.
Probably we'll use that
And it won't
question.
meet the future one either.
Probably we'll use this question in the afternoon discussion also.
Okay.
Thank you, Maxine.
You're welcome.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. You sort of answered this with Narendra's question, but I'd like some clarification. What component of this stuff is corrosive? Is
It's usually the chlorides or the salts that are in it, which is an impurity. It's not the oxide, the plutonium oxide. It's usually the impurities that are in it, like hydrogen. It could be chlorides, it could be nitrides, things like that that would cause the corrosion.
And is that like a byproduct of having made the innards of the bomb in the first place?
It's a byproduct of the material that was in the glove boxes when they cleaned the stuff out. So when they, basically it's the sweepings and things from the glove boxes, so they all just mix together. And that's why we have the 6 metric tons is a compilation of everything under the sun.
Well, how'd the stuff get in the glove box to begin with?
It's part of the processing
Oh,
of the
okay.
material, and so you'd have fines and things like that that would get into it when they cleaned it up.
So that kind of stuff wouldn't be in the inside of a bomb to corrode? Because I was thinking, like, if it's that, is it going to corrode from the inside out eventually?
I don't know anything
You don't
about,
know anything about
the
that?
weapons, and I don't know the weapons, so I can't answer that question,
Okay.
honestly.
AK Hassan Cab. I'm aware of the pivotal role that the cab plays in terms of providing some measure of security for our nation and protecting our nation from regarding materials falling in the hands of terrorists, etc. And this was also echoed in the film. So, can you give me some idea what that would mean in terms of if one canister of, 3013 or whatever was to fall in the hand of terrorists, what they could do with that material?
I can't. They would pull my badge. So I can't.
So there would be a lot of hypothesizing to go along.
There would be a lot, so.
Yeah. Gil, I think it's over to you.
Sure. Gil Allensworth, Cab. Hey, Maxine.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's you and John Lopez going for 1 and 2 on my favorite presenters. So John's got you beat because it's the number thing that I like. So,
I understand.
But I like you better. Just, if John's out there, sorry, bud. How long is it going to take to downblend 6 metric tons?
Till 2046.
The 2046 number is that. Okay. And I don't remember, but I saw it. I don't know where I read it, but I reported there's 12 metric tons of plutonium on the site.
I cannot comment on that.
Okay, so if that's reported, okay, you won't comment on it at all. But I'm just wondering. So we know EM's got 6. Is that we don't know if that's included in the 12? We don't know if that's all another entities. You won't tell me anything.
I can't tell you. No.
Promise.
Promise. Can't
Okay.
tell you.
And I guess the the thing that's standing out to me, and this may be more for Jim, Amy, I don't know. You know, we've been very careful throughout the CAB's been very careful throughout mocks, the arguments that were placed in the media about talking about it, not talking about it, and it's not an EM mission. And so we've always veered away from it. Now MOX is, you know, from what the limited we understand, reading the news and going to NEPA meetings and things like that, just outside of the CAB, we find out pit production's now the new thing that NSA is doing. And so we've always veered away from that because we're EM. And this has been an ongoing conversation we've had. But now we have a project that's a dual, I mean, from my understanding, it's a dual project. So now we have an EM and NSA project together. And so we know about the 6 metric tons, but we can't know about the other stuff. So Jim, I mean, I don't know if I direct it to Jim or Amy. I mean, how do we properly ask questions, or can we not ask questions because it's not an EM project, or it is an EM project that we're doing NNSA stuff? How can the CAB approach this to ask questions?
Jim Folk, DOE, what I'd offer up is you can always ask the question. It'll be up to us to be able to make that determination of a reminder maybe that it is an EM cab and we just can't go there. I mean, you know, I tried to come up with the analogy yesterday when we had this conversation, right? So North Augusta has a set of things it oversees and does. Augusta has a set of things it oversees and does. But when you come to the Savannah River, there's a mutual interest where they may want to check and balance each other, right? So it's that way with EM and NSA. Wherever we can, you know, we'll be able to share with you what we know. But in cases like this, we just simply either can't share or don't have the knowledge, quite frankly, in some cases, of what the NSA plans are. But certainly ask, and we'll do the best we can.
All right. And as we, you know, there's been a lot of stuff in the paper that we can't talk about. I mean, it's, you know, and media. But when it comes to budget, are we going to be allowed to ask some pretty penetrating questions? I mean, that's the only words come in mind, because how's the cost being split?
We can certainly tell you what our budget is from the EM side.
Right, and I think John has shared with you before, you know, their site, I don't even know the numbers, 40%, 60%, or however that balance works, right? So we can certainly share from that broad perspective, because it is a factor in our budget development and submittals. So from that perspective, we can help. But again, I'm not here to say what the NSA budget is or support or defend or whatever. We just take the bottom line number, and that's what John uses for those budget calcs.
So, going back to yesterday, hypothetical. I mean, we don't want the hypothetical question, but you know, let's say Savannah Riverside employees prove again to be the best in the country, and the 2046 numbers met in Maxine, and has done a great job of leading her team, and we're ahead of schedule, and we're at 2032.
I love that.
Well, I mean, I do too. I mean, but I believe that you have that type of ability. So the hypothetical is: do we shut it down now, or do the same people switch over to an NNSA contract? I mean, I know it's a hypothetical and you can't answer, but these are the type of questions that I'm running into, and I've always tried for the last few years to block that train of thought, but now my train of thought's opening up because of this.
Yeah, Jim Folk again. I think, you know, that's, don't want to sound flip, but that's part of the management job, right? So as an example, Maxine talked about establishing characterization capability over in K area to go prepare this stuff for WIP. Well, one of the things we're working with is between K area and E area, the solid waste program, we're bringing in a lot of that equipment and bringing in their operators to train them in E area where it's an unclassified setting. They don't have their clearances yet. So we can go through that. The benefit to the EM program and the solid waste is we can characterize some of the waste we have and get it ready, but then when they're ready for those people, we'll move them back over to K area. Once they have their clearances, they'll be fully trained and ready to go support. So again, you know, that's a day-to-day management activity that we just have to optimize those workers and those dollars, and I think pretty effectively are doing that.
Thank you.
Betty, I think I saw your card go up first.
Betty Cook Cab, thank you very much. I just have one question. If you go back to slide 5.
Yes, ma'am.
In the, I understand about processing and storing and putting it in the really small containers, but when it comes in, this container, there's a 400-pound container, and then the storage room, is that the plutonium that comes to us? Is that how it comes in the 400-pound container?
Yes, ma'am.
So that storage room has that many containers of plutonium before it's processed?
Yes, ma'am. So this area, this is the storage area. All of those are 9975s, which is this container here. This is the only way it can be legally shipped on the roads in the United States.
So it comes in 400 pounds, and then we process it down to the small containers?
Yes, ma'am.
Canisters. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But just to clarify, because I don't know if everybody, that whole 400 pounds is not 400 pounds of plutonium.
No,
That's
the only
total
part of
weight
it
the
that's
container.
plutonium, this is the cutaway of that container, is this little container that sits inside here. That's the only piece that is the plutonium oxide, right there, or the plutonium material.
So the whole package in total weighs that 400 pounds with the packaging and protective coating and.
You can ship both the oxide material or metal plutonium in these containers. So you could have oxide or metal inside there. But it's only in that little area inside this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan?
Dan Kaminsky Cab. Gil, some of your discussion was kind of leading me, and I just thought you were going to ask the question. But just straightforward, concern of the public obviously is radionucleoids on site and the dispensation of those and getting them off site or in a most stable and safe form. So flat out, does MOX product or other PU become part of the EM mission at SRS at any time?
So I don't know what you mean by MOX product. There is no
So
MOX
there was
product.
MOXable plutonium, correct?
Yeah, there was MOXable plutonium before, yes, sir.
Okay, so does that become an EM mission at any point?
At this time, no. That's an NSA mission.
Okay.
They're still responsible
And is
for
there
that
other
material.
stores elsewhere outside of SRS that become a K area storage or a downblend issue for SRS?
That's something that NSA is working on and what they're going
That's
to do.
all
with-
NSA?
Yes. We just have the 6 metric tons for
Okay, and we
EM.
have no other EM plutonium out there at any of the other sites?
Not outside the 6 metric tons.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Greg Murray. Now, it's my understanding that this stuff is pretty nasty stuff. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's not as
What-
bad as the 238 and the
Right.
235.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out then, I'm sure you've said this to us multiple times, and it just has not penetrated in my mind yet. Why are we not running 24/7 glove boxes and processing this stuff and getting rid of it? What's the holdup?
For EM, it was money.
So it's just basically money,
It
a
was
money
funding,
issue?
and so with that funding comes operators, and with that becomes time because you do have to get them Q cleared. They also have to go into what's called the Human Reliability Program,
Right.
which is on top of the Q clearance. So there's a lot of checks and balances of these employees before they're actually allowed to get access to the material.
But that's it. You're saying is all we've got to do is commit the money to doing it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Gil, you got more?
Guess, I mean, following up on Greg, my question's for Grace Ann and Susan. Where does DHEC stand on this?
Well, DHEC doesn't get involved in oversight of storage of the plutonium, the processing. So I think that's a question probably for some people above our pay grade.
Okay.
The governor's office probably has an opinion on it, but DHEC doesn't.
Because the reason I asked that question is years ago, a previous person with DHEC spoke about DHEC's recommendations to DOE about budgets and funding, and that was going back to Maxine's. We just don't have the funding, so that's where I was coming from with that question.
Okay. Well, we certainly want to see DOE get a very robust budget to deal with all of their programs, whether that be soil and groundwater cleanup or dealing with the plutonium. And we do write, we've provided recommendations to DOE for their budget of areas that they should prioritize, just like the CAB does.
All right. Any other questions for Maxine?
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Folks, thank you. Those were solid questions that really, I think, helped expand everyone's understanding of the material. There were some hard ones in there, but I really think that those were valuable to helping everybody get a firm grasp of the issues going on. So thank you. Up next, we have AMCAP fuel inspections. This was special request from Nuclear Materials. Dave Rose, you want to take it away?
Thank you. Good morning, folks. From the L Area Project out at Savannah River. Asked to come to talk to you this morning about the AMCAP, the Augmented Monitoring and Condition Assessment Program. That's a lot of words, so we'll just use AMCAP primarily from here on out. AMCAP was born around 2011. At that time, it became apparent that the wet storage in El Basin was going to go well beyond what was our planning horizon at that time, which was about 2020. Prior to 2010, the planning was that there would be that exchange of fuel with Idaho and processing aluminum-based fuel in H Canyon, and that all that would commence and be completed by 2019. The facility would be de-inventoried in 2020. Well, around the 2010 timeframe, because we hadn't really gotten into the Idaho swap, we recognized that we weren't going to make 2020. And as a result, it caused us to really recognize that we need to reevaluate what we were doing in the way of surveillance and monitoring of the fuel in El Basin and the facilities that support that. We were very comfortable with the plans and programs we had if our endpoint was 2019, 2020, but thinking that we might have to go to 2030, 2040 or beyond, that we thought it was worthwhile to go back and look at those programs and see what might be appropriate to do to enhance that, and thus the birth of the AMCAP program. To understand AMCAP, it's important to note that it is an augmentation, the first word, augmented. So it lays on top of already pre-existing programs that we had in place for monitoring and protecting the material. The main ones being the Basin Water Chemistry Control Program. This is the system that operates the El Basin to keep the water clean, pure, chlorides, ice, any kind of ions, those kind of things as low as possible, and keep the water pure. Very important to long-term storage. So that program already existed, as well as the sampling that goes along with that. A corrosion surveillance program. This is where we've taken and placed samples, we call them coupons, down into El Basin that represent fuel, represent the storage rack systems and other systems. Those stay in the water for a number of years. We pull them out periodically, go to Savannah River National Laboratory. They do the analysis on that, look at corrosion rates, help ensure that we have the right models for corrosion, and can extrapolate out the performance of the fuel and systems. So that program already existed, as well as the structural integrity program for monitoring the conditions of the basin itself. All those together fit to make sure that we meet what's known across the nuclear industry as the general safety functions for storage of spent nuclear fuel. The primary items listed there, the maintain criticality safety, of course, maintain cooling of the fuel. This is important in some facilities. For us, the material's aged enough by the time it reaches us that there is no active cooling for the fuel in El Basin, so that's not really an issue of our concern. Maintaining confinement of the radionuclides within the fuel or within the fuel storage systems, that's important to us as we look at aging. And also maintaining the ability to retrieve that material to support whatever the disposition missions might be. So our programs are built around those safety criteria. Find the right button here. Okay. So as we moved into looking at what we should do under AMCAP, we really came to three basic legs or portions of that program. One, to look at the aluminum-based fuels that are in our standard storage configurations. This makes up the bulk of the material that we have in the basin, the largest inventory. But to look at those configurations, but also need to look at the non-aluminum. These are items that are mostly either stainless steel or zirconium-clad materials that were there from previous missions, and to understand how they perform in the basin environment and what examinations we might need to do to better understand or validate what we understand about those, and to look at the basin structure itself to validate that the material characteristics that feed into our seismic analyses, our structural analyses, all those, make sure that there aren't aging things going on with the basin itself that might compromise its use as a storage facility. With the overall goal, the final bullet there being the information gathered under all these programs would be evaluated and determine what should we do to update, revise, modernize those basic programs to enhance them, and in the end, AMCAP as a standalone program would cease to exist as it rolled back into our normal programs, became part of normal operations. So let's start with the aluminum fuel. I know you've seen these pictures before in previous presentations, but just as a reminder, the most typical shape, sizes of aluminum-based fuels we receive as they get placed end to end in a about 12-foot long, 5-inch diameter aluminum tube that we call a bundle, and then get placed in this rack storage system that you see here. You've seen those. What's important to AMCAP, one of the features about that's important to AMCAP, is that those fuel bundles have little openings at the top and in the bottom, so that very pure water that we're keeping and maintaining in the basin is able to circulate and pass through those fuel bundles and surround, immerse those fuel assemblies, so they are not sealed away into a tube that's isolated from the good water of the basin, but are continually being surrounded by that chemically pure water that's in the L basin. So for the aluminum fuels, what we decided in the program was to select a cross-section of fuels that were known to have defects. As you've probably heard before, we receive fuel from many places around the world. Some of the storage systems at those locations were not as good as what we have here, or these are research facilities. They'll take fuel assemblies apart, sometimes cut pieces out of them, do things to them to disrupt their normal configurations. So we have fuel that at the time we received it had known defects. So we were going to start by looking at some of those, look at those, examine them, and then the idea being come back at some period, and for discussion points we're using 5 years, and look and see if the conditions between the first and the second inspections follow along the trends that we would get from the predictive models, from the scientific evaluations and the coupon analysis and all. So first step was to pick the fuels. We did that. We picked 10 with a variety of reactor exposures. Next was to develop inspection equipment and the procedures for doing these inspections. This isn't the first time that we've determined that we want to pull fuel out of the basin, examine it, and compare it and look at aging. Previous operations like that didn't yield valuable results because the configurations weren't reproducible. As you change the lighting or the positioning of the lighting and the cameras and such, you get shadows and things that you really couldn't compare a new reading to an old reading. So we developed a table that's, oops, pushed the wrong button. Okay, get the right one. This is an examination table that was set up. It has all these grid lines to give you indexing. It has holders for the fuel, has camera, it has fixed lighting positions on various corners, has these stations where you can move the lights and cameras to fixed positions so that this item is now submerged in L basin. We can place an assembly on it and have very fixed geometry, very reproducible results there. So when we come back 5 years from now and look at it, we can put the same assembly in the same exact position, look at it with the same lighting and same cameras. So that's been built. Procedures have been developed. Before we disturbed these, we went in and used a syringe system to extract water from those bundles through these small openings that are in the top of them. That being to confirm what we were hoping we'd find, that the water conditions, the pH, the conductivity, all those parameters inside the bundle were indeed matching what we were maintaining in the bulk area of the basin itself. And that's what we found. But we want to do that before we pick these up and started moving them around and somehow agitating them. We want to make sure we got it before we touch them. That was done. Nothing remarkable out of any of that. We are now into the visual inspections. The first one was done in January of this year. We did 3 more in June. The rest are scheduled for later this year, before the end of this calendar year. And I'll look at some of those results here. The assembly that was used in January was this assembly number S113 from the RA3 facility. That's in Argentina. This material was received at Savannah River around 2001. I believe early 2001 was when the shipment actually arrived. It had been out of the reactor in Argentina and stored for about 30 years. And it had been stored in water that was not of the same quality level that we have. So it had very visible corrosion on that assembly as we observed it, photographed it, many years ago, in the around 2000 timeframe. So we brought that one in. Here's one of the pictures from it, where it's laying there on the inspection table. Our system worked well. Our removing it, the bundle from the racks, taking the lid off, getting the assembly out, placing it on the table, all the handling worked very well. The system worked with excellent lighting and camera. We were able then to rebundle and place it back into storage where we can pull it again in the future as we need to. Some of the things we did see is some contrasting colors in the active fuel region. You can see that, oops, wrong button, get the right one. You can see that here. Some corrosion nodules on the edges and in the crevices, and some small nodules. And if we look at the next picture, this is looking at a side plate, aluminum side plate, and you can see some corrosion products there along the edge. Actually not as severe as what we had seen when we first retrieved these in Argentina. In this picture, this is the outer fuel plate where it joins the side plate, and you can see there's a crevice where they're joined there, and then you see some corrosion products, small amount of corrosion products in that joint there. And here's the pictures from the top and the bottom. Looking at the bottom end, this assembly was cropped. Sometimes to get most usage out of our storage, extra inert aluminum will be cut off the tops and the bottom. So this assembly had been cropped. As part of that, they had cropped off the fuel identification. So this extra plate was slipped down in it. And if you use your imagination, you can read the S113 etching that was on that ID plate that was slipped down into the assembly and tabbed so that it would provide a positive identification of that assembly. So you're seeing that piece that was added at the time that the assembly was cropped. You can also see this outer plate here sustained a little bit of damage during cropping. What you don't see is very much corrosion there. You can see a little tiny bit of corrosion on the edge of that plate. And you can see down into the assembly there. So that's what we were seeing in the January inspection. I don't have pictures up on the June inspection. Different assemblies, some little different geometries, different storage conditions. They were from different facilities in this Argentina one. But the results were much the same. Small corrosion at the places where we had previously seen corrosion before we received it. And really, at this point, nothing really remarkable in what we're seeing, other than it's proving that our system is working very well to this point to be able to get very good visual record of these assemblies. Changing now to the non-aluminum. As you know, our mission is to receive and store the aluminum-based fuels from around the complex in the world. But in the very early days, there were a number of non-aluminum items that were either produced on Savannah Riverside or received from other off-site facilities. So as a group, the non-aluminum, the stainless steel and zirc, are very old, many different configurations, sizes, shapes, conditions, and stainless steel clad, zirc clad, various types of cladding on those. We have those stored in the L basin in 3 basically different storage configurations, each of which we need to consider as we look at how it might be aging and what we might do to assess its aging. Some are directly, the fuel assemblies are directly placed in the long bundles, just like I just showed for the aluminum-based fuels. And the picture on the upper right there just shows, 3 of the types, looking at the bottom end of 3 of the different types of bundle tubes, all of them about 5 inches in cross-section. So some are directly placed in those. Down here, you see a small can. Some of the very old materials were pieces and parts from experiments that were done on fuel assemblies. So there's cut pieces, other loose items that were placed in small cans. And those cans, in some cases, were placed in these bundles. They were of a size they would fit in the 5-inch diameter bundling tubes that we use for the other fuels. Some of the pieces, geometry, shape, condition, too large to fit into a 5-inch diameter bundle. And for those, they're placed in what I call an oversized can. There's a couple of different sizes of these. The one in the picture here is about an 8-inch diameter tube, about 12 feet long. Some of them are a little bit larger. Fuels that were placed in those oversized cans, in some cases, were directly placed in the can, or in many cases, they were placed in cans, and those cans were placed in cans, or they were put in cans, and then in a can, and then in a can. Different layers of containment before they were placed into the large oversized cans that are shown there on the bottom right. So we have this wide variety of materials, and the challenge is to know what's happening with these as we perhaps store these for another 30, 40, 50 years. We took a little sidestep early in the MCAP process. As we started looking at those configurations, it was pretty quick that we recognized that we had configurations where there was materials that were known to be in failed conditions that were in these oversized cans. And that provided only a single barrier between this failed material and our basin pool that we wanted to keep clean. So early on in the program, the configuration was such that we could do in situ visual and ultrasonic examinations on those. What you're seeing here is the top of one of the oversized cans. You're seeing the apparatus that was lowered down to run along the entire length, vertical length of the can to look at visual and do ultrasonic tank can wall thickness measurements. That was completed early in the program. There were really no anomalies. There was no perceptible change in the thickness of those tubes, so nothing untoward going on, corroding from the inside out, for example. There was no evidence to see that was happening. So that was done early. Then we stepped back and looked at the more comprehensive program some more. One of the things we had to do at the very start was figure out what we had. A lot of this material was irradiated in the 1960s. Records were scattered, so we had to pull all that information together, create a big database, and look at what was all we had, what did we know about it in terms of its history, what its material contents were, and its configurations, and then take all that information and decide where should we focus our effort. There's hundreds, literally, of different possible configurations of fuel type, fuel cladding type, can type, overcan type that are out there. Which ones of those were the ones that might be the most vulnerable to creating an issue, and focus our attention on those as we start forward. So that was done, looking at the susceptibility for that degradation. So what we had to consider in that, and you can see a little bit here, is what was the original condition of the fuel? Was it intact? Was it pieces? Galvanic couples. This is where you have dissimilar metals, aluminum in contact with zirconium materials, aluminum in contact with stainless. Those kind of dissimilar metals create an environment that can enhance the rate of corrosion. Where those were, need to consider that may be present, certainly is present in a number of these cans. What's the type of can? How robust is it? What's its integrity? how many levels of containment, as I currently mentioned. Is there a single level, or are there multiple cans? And then what would be the consequences to those safety criteria back on slide number 2? Would it present a criticality problem? Would it be a problem with containment? Would it be a problem with retrievability for future processing? And from that, we want to make sure that we look at all the different storage configurations, but you have to keep it set. You can't look at everything, so prioritizing and doing that. So that's where we are today on that. If I move to the next slide, what are we doing? 2018, we narrowed down that list to the selected configurations for the study. We established what the inspection criteria we wanted to have, what would be acceptance criteria, looked at the available different non-destructive assay technologies, working very closely with the National Laboratory on what technologies are out there that could be deployed, and narrowed that down, and with the acceptance criteria. What we're doing this year, we've created this mock-up facility with the lab where we've taken what looks like a small section of a storage rack with different types of bundles, different height bundles, placed them in here, and then as we develop the NDE, procure the different equipment. Again, we're back to primarily visual and ultrasonic type examination equipment that can be scaled to a size that can fit down in these tight spaces. And in the top right, you can see a video probe that's going down into an area where you have the bundle and then the what would be the rack here, and looking at how can we execute this examination program and get meaningful results, doing all this in the clean laboratory before we bring any of this back out to the facility and do it in the field. So we're doing the mock-ups, testing. The goal is to complete that work this year. And then, excuse me, starting in 2020, get out in the field and start the actual examinations of these selected fuels and these selected positions. This is a evolutionary type program. You learn something. As you learn something, that helps direct the next place you go. I can't tell you what the next chapter in this will be. Once we gather this information, we have a diverse group of people looking at the results to determine, are there items from this selected group that we think we need to pull from storage and somehow repackage, or do we need to overpack something, or is it all great? All those are the questions that are out there. We can't answer those today. We're out there gathering this information, and as we gather more information, we'll develop where the program goes from there. Then the final leg, I put this in for completeness. It wasn't really in the title of the presentation, but I did mention that there was a third element to AMCAP, that being the look at the structure of the basin itself. Back before we grouted in C reactor basin, we identified that we could go in and collect some core samples from the basin wall. It's constructed at the same time, same materials of construction, same design, same work, similar operating histories. Pull a sample out of the wall and there's a little punctuation missing there I noticed, do compressive strength testing and microstructural analysis on this core sample. So what you're seeing in the picture here is here's a section of that core from down deep in the wall undergoing its compression and strength test. Those results showed the strength was well above the design criteria and very much above what's assumed in our structural analyses calculations. And also looking at that boundary area where the basin water meets the concrete, were there any deleterious activities going on between that water and concrete barrier? Looking at things like chemical attack, shrinkage, cracking, radiation effects. Really didn't see, here's a micrograph image from all that. If you have questions, you can ask Dr. Sindelar in the back. I won't speak to that. But looking at all these different, they can identify and tell you what all these different little specks and all are in this concrete, but did not see anything that would challenge the concrete's performance as a containment basin for the fuel and holding the water and materials there. So that program is actually completed out of AMCAP. Then that brings me to a conclusion. The aluminum-based examinations underway currently. We'll do some more. I believe they're scheduled in August, and then the last one's in December. The non-aluminum fuel examinations, working the mock-ups, deploy that in the field next year. But to this point, we haven't seen anything in the results to date that challenge the current models that are used to do the prediction of the performance of the fuels, the basin rack structures, the basin itself. So at this point, so far it's been good news to help validate what we're currently, the current beliefs, the current science that goes into saying that it's going to be safe to continue to store the fuel in El Basin for several more decades. That's the end of that.
It's another interesting wild job. Somebody went to work one day and cut down a fuel assembly and just went home. That was wild. Doug, let's start with you.
Doug Howard Cap, great presentation. Sir, could you run us through the procedure that you all use? Like, for instance, the fuel that came from Argentina. What is the I guess, procedure that is used? You send a team there to take a look at it prior to it coming here?
Once DOE has determined that a country is going to ship material to us, that facility, I'll go through sort of the typical, there's lots of one-offs, but the typical process would be they would send us preliminary information, how many, what type, what's the prints. They send us a document. They put together a document that describes all that. We review that document, ask questions about it. Sometimes we have to work with them to get it everything we need. But we'll send a team to that facility to go, to the extent possible, we like to inspect the fuel there before they ship it to us. Because if it's a problem, we want it addressed on their end, not to become a problem for us once it's received in El Basin. And while we're there, we're not only looking at the fuel, but looking at how the facility is operated. What do we take away from that in terms of the knowledge, the experience, the understanding of the people, their conduct of operation, their basin water chemistry, their protocols? Is this a facility that's being run really well, or is this a facility that has been shut down and this fuel is an annoyance that's been stuck in a closet somewhere until we come along? And we've seen the whole range of that. That then helps determine what more rigor we would need to put into it in terms of either helping them or to get it to us. So we will, if the fuel, for example, we received some fuel from one country that they had taken it all apart. Okay, so what could we do to help them put this into a container that would meet the shipping requirements? You got to meet the licensing of the cask. It has to meet DOT and NRC and all the shipper regulations. But we also want it put in a container, ideally, that would be compatible with our storage systems, something small enough we could put it in a fuel bundle, something that has a bale on it so we can pick it up and handle it with our equipment, something that's made out of materials that are compatible with H Canyon, so that if we ship it to H Canyon, they would be able to process. So we'll work with them, depending on what problems they have, to help them be able to make a safe shipment, but also something that makes it as efficient as possible on our end once it comes here. And we've seen over the decades just about all imaginable kinds of conditions of the fuel. And it's, as I'll tell folks, this is under the non-proliferation program. Our goal is to repatriate this U.S. origin, highly enriched uranium, in some case weapons usable material. We're going to work with that shipping facility to make sure that it can come to us and come here safely for us to store. It's not if it's going to come here. We're not going to tell a foreign, through NNSA or interface with them, that, no, it looks hard, we're not going to take it. Turkey, just keep your material or whatever. We're going to figure out what it takes to be able to safely ship it, to bring it in and store it. So we work with, that's the aspect we're working from. A lot of iterations depending on who you're working with. Universities with research reactors. You think it's full of PhDs, everything will be great. Some of these details are not what they want to deal with. So we'll have to work with them on, yes, we need to know, Give us the designs, what was in it, how much has it been irradiated, how long has it been out of the reactor, how long has it been cooled, well, we have to help them a lot sometimes, and for me, those kind of facilities, it's a once-in-a-lifetime event. For us, we do it every day, so it's easy for us to say, oh, well, they should know that, but no, they shouldn't. They're only doing it one time. We understand that we have to help walk them through that process. We and our DOE counterparts that are the interface between us and the facility all work together with the facilities and the shippers to make it all work smoothly. We've had enough time now that we've got it where it's a pretty slick operation. In early days, it was probably not so much so. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was my other question. You answered it, whether or not you could refuse or have you ever refused. But with it being proliferating, you would have to receive it.
I have no knowledge of any time we've told somebody that we weren't going to take their material.
Thank you.
Let's go around the other way this time. Narendra?
Narendra Malik, Cab. You mentioned that some of the bundles could be corroded over the period in the storage.
We have, especially amongst I guess only among the non-aluminum, there's situations where you may have a fuel assembly that is clad with zirconium. It may be in a container that is made of aluminum, and that inside of another container. So at that point where you have the zirconium assembly in contact with the aluminum can, that's an environment that can create a galvanic couple and can make corrosion in that location proceed at a little faster rate than just general corrosion. Everything corrodes. You put it in the atmosphere, everything corrodes infinitesimally small at times, but everything corrodes. But those are places where what we want to understand is to what extent might those cans be undergoing corrosion such that the can integrity over time might become suspect. And that's the kind of thing we want to study and figure out, is it going on? If it is, what can or should we be doing about that?
Do you give any priority to those corroded bundles to be sent to Canyon for treatment over others?
In the very beginning, very, very beginning, and I didn't put it on the slides, when we first started compiling this list of the kind of off-normal kind of materials we had, there was a group called SRE. That was a sodium reactor experiment, from a facility out west. Those were declad assemblies that were inside a bundle. And there we had only one level containment. The material itself, in those sealed cans, if the can leaked, you could have a fairly high corrosion rate, reactive rate in there. And so those were identified as probably our most vulnerable in terms of something happening with them that might happen in a fairly aggressive way. Most corrosion happens very slowly, but these could have had a little more aggressive corrosion. Those all went to the canyon. They've been dissolved and disposed of. I think in previous presentations you've seen some of the discussions about fuel dispositions, and today, of course, we do not have the capability to send the zirconium and stainless steel clad fuels to H Canyon. It's not compatible with the current processes at H Canyon. They're talking about, I don't want to step on you, can I say electrolytic dissolver, Maxine? Yeah, okay. So there's talk about reactivating electrolytic dissolver in H Canyon. It gives you an ability to process some of these non-aluminum type fuels. Certainly, we work with them. If we see something that we think should be prioritized, we'll see if it's compatible with their electrolytic dissolver. But in many cases, at least today, if something untoward starts to happen, the primary reaction would be to overpack it. You can always add another layer of canning if something starts to happen. Not ideally what you want to do, but can be done. But yes, we, very early in the days, identifying something, There was potential problem, high potential for a problem. The canyon was a solution, and we executed that plan, and that problem is now in the waste tanks.
Charles.
Charles Hilton, the cab. I'm curious, you mentioned or you used the word purified water that's in these basins.
Yes.
My experience with purified water, when you go to ultra pure deionized water, it becomes highly corrosive. I'm sure there's complex chemistry involved in this process. Is it a super buffered water that y'all just maintain a high purity level?
No, with the aluminum, the corrosion rates are at their minimum if you keep the ion content of the water as low as possible. And so that's what our system does. We have the system that removes particulates, the dust and dirt, and that kind of thing. Use resin ion exchange columns to strip out soluble ions to keep the conductivity, the measure of the ions in the water, as near zero as possible. That environment is optimal for the aluminum. So we absolutely don't add any kind of caustic or acid or anything to adjust pH or anything, because all those add ions. Everything you're going to do is to get the ions out of the water, and that's what our system's set up to do.
What's the pH of the water?
It's slightly acidic only because of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's I can't tell you the exact number, but it's slightly on the acidic side because of the exchange that goes on between carbon dioxide in the air and the water, so you get some dissolved. I guess it's carbonic acid. Is it carbonic or carbolic acid? It's one of those that you get into a very weak acid and you get into the water. So it's slightly acidic.
Thank you.
All right, Dave.
Dave Isley, cab. Well done, Dave. Y'all made a lot of progress. Tell me, overall, is the board satisfied with the progress you've made on this program?
You're talking about the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I haven't heard anything from them in a long time. So
No
I
news is
take
good news?
silence as an affirmation, but that could change in a heartbeat. But because as you're aware, in the early days, there was a lot of interaction between the board and this program. They had a lot of interest in what we were doing and what our results were. But we've presented to the full board several years ago and have not heard anything else back regarding the AMCAP program.
Your oversized can inspection enhanced, that's what I'll call that. Have they come back that they think that's sufficient, or again, you haven't heard from them?
From the board?
Yeah.
I have not heard anything back
again,
there.
no news is good news.
They were anxious for us to do something in the field, and so this actually scratched an itch that they had early on when we went in and did that. And since those results were published, really have not heard anything back from them, positive or negative.
I would take that as a positive. And just for me, did you get the resin affected zone cleaned up, or is that still ongoing?
Okay. The resin affected zone, we do bring people in a little bit. Early in the days of putting the deionization system in, there was an upset where some deionized resin got spilled back into a corner of the basin. It's presently where the high flux isotope reactor, the fuel from Oak Ridge, is stored. As we've seen in previous presentations here, we have a campaign to process that fuel, a portion of that fuel in H Canyon. And so we need to be able to get these cores out of this resin-affected zone, is what we call it, where the resin was spilled on it, clean them up to a level that's suitable for shipment and processing at H Canyon. We're about 2/3 of the way through that. We've completed the analysis that lets us vacuum the resin to the monitor basin. We've got a design that's almost finalized for a cleaning station, and our schedule would have us within the next year plus a little bit install the cleaning station and be able to take hypercores out of the resin affected zone to the cleaning station, get as much of the resin off and out of it as we can. And we think we'll get almost all of it. Can't guarantee every little pebble comes off. And then by a year or so from now, be in the process of being able to load casks from the resin affected zone to ship to H Canyon.
Good enough, thank you.
Dan Kaminsky, Cab. Thank you, Dave, for a great presentation. I have a question, but I think it's answered by your last comment. So no findings. So there's been no leakers in L area?
Don't say that. We receive failed fuel. Okay. But again, we're not going to tell somebody we're not going to take your fuel because it's got a hole in the cladding. Okay. So we have aluminum-based fuel that has scratches, dents, holes bored in them, things like that. So at those locations, you get some small amount of corrosion and some small evolution of fission products, cesium being one of the more soluble ones that we take out continuously with our deionization system. Among the stainless steel and Zirc, there were items that were clearly failed, severely failed, when we put them in the oversized cans. So to say that we have no leakers, would not be a correct statement. Our system manages the leaking. We monitor closely how much of the cesium, which is a good telltale isotope, how much of that is being released into the water and how much of it we're taking out with our resins all the time. We're monitoring that to see, is there anything happening where the rate's increasing. Actually, if you look back over the last several years, the rate is either constant or slightly decreasing. So that's positive for now that things aren't worsening in terms of some of these fuels that have known through cladding penetrations.
And with the receiving of fuel from other storage facilities globally, is there any chance of cross-contaminants affecting your water quality?
I wouldn't give an absolute answer to that. The fuel, we go in and look at their basins. If the fuel needs to be cleaned in some way before they ship it, we'll have those discussions. There are high standards for placing those in the cask to meet the shipping requirements. But could I say that there's not going to be something stuck to one of them that eventually would come out in our basin? I can't make that claim. Okay. We look at their operating history, what's been done in these assemblies, and to make sure, for example, one of the things we want to make sure that we don't get is any sodium. Sodium is highly reactive with water, so we want to make sure we don't get any of that. You've seen the pictures of the assemblies. It's not possible to inspect down between every fuel plate to make sure there's not some bubble gum wrapper or something stuck in one of them.
So just before we go off of Dan's question, that last bullet, just to remind everybody, L area was planned to be at its end of life in 2019, back in the late 2010 time period. We knew that wasn't going to happen, so we had SRNL do a study of how long could it stay in wet storage. That's where the whole AMCAP campaign came from. So that bullet is addressing that study that SRNL did that said that the basin was going to be good for another 50 years or beyond if we did these things. So they have that bullet is basically verifying that the assumptions in that analysis that SRNL did were true, and we are still in a safe storage condition in El Basin.
Jim?
Jim Gale, Cap. In regard to the aluminum-based fuel that's in Idaho,
yes.
Has that gone through a similar process, or is it somewhere or how quickly could you react if it was said to bring it here and get it processed or stored?
Yeah, so I think you're probably referring to the ATR, Advanced Test Reactor fuel at Idaho. There's several thousands of those aluminum assemblies there. They have it in different types of storage. A portion of that has been run through their dry storage, is in dry storage. Other parts are in the basin. We have looked at their fuel. It is very compatible with everything that we have here. we receive fuel routinely from the Missouri reactor, called MER fuel, Missouri University Research Reactor. Their ATR fuel looks almost identical to that MER fuel, only it's taller. So what it would mean to us, process-wise, we would only be able to get probably 2 of those in a 12-foot bundle instead of 4 or 5 like we do shorter assemblies, but it's fabricated almost identical to fuels that we receive today. So to get our receiving of that fuel up and going from MER, we'd have to go through the same type of process I was describing. You know, they'll provide the data, we'll review the data, we'll settle on what cask is being shipped in, how many assemblies in a cask, how it's going to be identified, all that kind of stuff. You know, we'll go through that process. But from an analytical standpoint on our end, we'll do the normal criticality analysis, but there wouldn't be anything really extraordinary it would take on our end to bring that material in, store it in our standard storage configuration, have it ready to go to H Canyon whenever H Canyon is ready to take it.
Thank you.
Bob Smith, Cab. I understand the proliferation and the receiving back of materials, but how do we ensure or know that the materials we are going to be taking back are actual materials that were originating from the United States?
That's really handled by NNSA. We'll do our due diligence. We'll get the manufacturing drawings that were done for the fuel so that we'll have its pedigree to the extent that it's available, to know who manufactured it. There aren't that many manufacturers around the world. Where do they get their material from? The U.S. origin stuff has been tracked by our own, not us, Savannah River, but has is tracked by other entities within the government to know who has it and where it is. Diversion possibilities, I won't speak to that. It's not my line of business here. All I'm saying is that we do what we can to follow it to the extent possible from birth to receipt here through the manufacturing process, through their reactor operations, through their storage facilities, and the etched engravings that are on most of the assemblies are actually placed on them at the time they're manufactured. So you at least have that as an ID marker to trace it through the system. But evildoers will do evil, and I can't really speak to that.
One other quick question. You mentioned there is a mix of aluminum versus non-aluminum, and the majority is aluminum. What percentage is aluminum versus non-aluminum?
Well, it depends on the measure you use. In terms of pieces that we count, it's roughly 12,000 or so pieces of aluminum and less than 2,000 of the stainless and zirc. In terms of weight, it's balanced the other way. A lot of the stainless steel and zirc was not highly enriched, so the low enriched material is made in a heavier form. Much of it is not enriched at all. It was natural uranium. So weight-wise, it's probably, please don't quote me, it's probably about 60-70% is the non-aluminum, because aluminum fuel is mostly highly enriched, so you don't have as much uranium in each assembly. So so it depends on the measure that you want to use in terms of how you want to count things, whether it's by weight or by pieces or what. So.
What about in terms of hazard or in terms of recovery?
Yeah, okay. So everyone's got their own scale there for hazard. In terms of, if you want to measure, say, look at that list of criteria, the 4 functions there. Criticality. The highly enriched has far more criticality potential if you were to have a problem than the natural uranium. Natural uranium is not going to be a criticality issue in the light water-filled basin. If you're looking at cooling, it's all cooled for us. Looking at containment. Well, in our cases, the aluminum, by its very nature, is a very stable form, and so it's not very prone for us to have containment issues of keeping fission products and the residual uranium and all within the assembly. The stainless and zirc, because they were run through a lot of tests, like I say, much of it's cut pieces, it's scrap, it's various other pieces and parts. Their containment as an assembly was compromised decades ago, and now it's in a can. And so you're talking about the containment in the can. So it's, how do you want to measure the risk from each of those different, sort of attributes?
Okay, thank you.
Gil, wrap it up for us.
Great. Gil Allensworth, Cap. There was talk a while back about taking some of it out, right, and putting it above ground.
Yeah, as you know, in the commercial power industry, they are driven to dry storage because of just space considerations in their basin. And then that stage that they're awaiting repository. And we look at what we can learn from them, and is there something that we could or should do here that might prepare fuels for repository. If you're going to a repository, that packaging it into some type of road-ready container, whether you actually stored it or just prepared it and shipped it, is a step in that process. Material going to the canyon, of course, we don't need to think about that. So we've done a number of conceptual studies off and on over the years to look at, if we were to go to dry storage, could we use the same types of containers that the commercial industry uses? There is a DOE standard canister, a couple of different diameters and lengths, that is sort of the leading way that DOE would perhaps like to see the fuel packaged. And we've done studies on looking at those issues, criticality, aging effects in those, if we were to put it into dry storage. There's nothing actively going on right now to advance that much. We touch it a few times a year, look at it, and primarily with the folks in the National Laboratory, and we'll support their efforts. But at any point a decision could be made to take everything we have and prepare it for a repository, in which case dry storage would be an interim step in doing that.
Okay. How imminent is it to when we fill up?
Pardon?
How imminent is to when we fill up and we run out of space?
We won't run out of space.
Ever?
In the L Basin? Mm-hmm. No. We know, the Foreign Fuel Receipt Program just got reinstituted in part. It was all going to end in 2019. That was part of that basis for shutting down and receipts in 2019. It has been extended. The Japanese, of course, had their crisis over there. So we have agreement to continue to receive through 2029. But we have enough storage capacity in L Basin that we could receive everything from everyone who wants to ship us something without having to install more racks, with the one exception of the HIFER facility in Oak Ridge. That facility, our storage was fully filled for that particular fuel type. It's much larger, doesn't fit the standard rack. But we're processing that material in the canyon. So right now we have this, I think Keela probably showed you the graph at the meeting at the Savannah Rapids a few months ago, where you have the comes in and the goes out, so the HIFER to show that we don't ever exceed the storage capacity.
That we process those 1,000 bundles so that we don't exceed our capacity. If we didn't process the 1,000 bundles, we would have exceeded our capacity and needed additional racks.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, I guess the above ground storage, that's my question. If we're never going to run out of space in L Basin, why are we even researching above ground storage?
So the department has to look at all options, and at the time, the option of running the canyon wasn't looking favorable because of funding, so we have to have a backup to H Canyon, and that was the backup to H Canyon, is dry storage of the fuel.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
everybody's ready to go to lunch.
Yeah, we're
Thanks.
standing between you and lunch, right?
Thanks, Mr. Rose.
Thank you.
All right, so we're a few minutes ahead, but I'm not going to cut your lunchtime at all. What we're going to do is we're still going to come back at 12:30. I am going to ask that you be cognizant of where you're going. If you're going to a sit-down restaurant, I wouldn't suggest large groups because you'll just make a really long ticket time. So try to make it quick. I also request light lunches because when we have heavy lunches, some of us get a little sleepy. And we definitely want to be awake for Mark Centerling's presentation because this is a unique opportunity. We want to make the best of it. Thank you, everybody. Please be back in your seats at 12:30.